All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome today. I'm so excited to be hosting this webinar today. We are here to kick off the Workforce and Leadership Development webinar series. Today is session 1 out of 2, with the second webinar taking place this Thursday at the same time from 11 to 12 Central. Today, we will cover the topic of why adaptability. This event today, as well as the one on Thursday, are both being recorded and will be posted to the website at a later date, as well as an email that will be sent out on Thursday after the last webinar in this series that will have event links as well as a survey link where you can get qualified ACHE credit. My name is Caleb Lozinski with the National Rural Health Resource Center, who is providing this webinar today. Your audio is muted by default to avoid background noise and feedback. Please remain muted unless you have a question. To unmute your line, please select the microphone icon in the lower left corner of your screen. If you dialed in, you can press *6 to unmute your line. The National Rural Health Resource Center is a nonprofit organization dedicated to sustaining and improving healthcare in rural communities. The center is the TA provider for the Delta Region Community Health Systems Development Program. The National Rural Health Resource Center is funded by the Federal Office of Rural Health Policy in collaboration with the Delta Regional Authority. All right. So before we get into our content today, I would just like to take a moment to introduce our two wonderful speakers. Let me go ahead and spotlight them for everyone as well. All right. So as you can see here, we have Alexis Foster and Shannon Studden. Shannon Studden, principal consultant and Shannon Studden consultant, specializes in employee engagement, organizational culture, conflict management, work team development, and emotional intelligence. In her role, she provides education, coaching, and technical assistance designed to help leaders and organizations achieve their goal. With over 25 years experience providing education and coaching to leaders in such fields as healthcare, mining, and energy, Shannon uses a personalized, practical approach focused on measurable outcomes. As well as Alexis Foster, she began her work at the center in February of 2023 and currently serves as the Workforce and Leadership Consultation Program Specialist on the Delta program. She provides technical assistance and workforce and leadership development, supports program activities, and conducts communication, dissemination, and evaluation of program activities and outcomes. Now I will turn things over to our two wonderful speakers to get us started today. Alexis and Shannon, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Caleb. Thank you for having us. We're really excited about today's content. Good morning and afternoon to some. What brings us here today is, of course, a workforce and leadership webinar series that's going to be focused on being that adaptable leader. So how does this leader strengthen engagement through retention and results by meeting people where they are, is what we're going to get into today. In today's session, we will focus on exactly what engagement is, how to be adaptable to others' differences, and looking at some key sources of differences and what adaptability could look like. We do want this session to have the opportunity to be conversational, so we want you all to ask questions by unmuting or in chat during that Q&A portion so we can provide some answers to you, because we know we all have different styles of how we do things, but our common goal is being able to meet our teams and staff and individuals where they are so they can feel heard and respected and valued. As Caleb stated, we will have that second part session this week where we'll discuss that adaptable approach to having one-on-one meetings and being that specific type of coach and how that can have an impact on conversations with staff. So you may wonder, what questions will I get answered today? Well, we hope to provide clarity on what engagement is and why is it important, and what role do leaders play in employee engagement, and what's the big deal when it comes to being an adaptable leader? And what does that look like? So we're going to share some research and best practices. Some of what we share might be things you already know about, or things that just don't fit with your organization's culture or existing processes. And for some of you, what we talk about in this series might be completely new to you. And you might think that there's no way that we can do all of this. But no matter what your situation is, we ask that you listen with an open mind, look for one of two concepts that could help you make even a small improvement in your employees' experience at work, with the goal of strengthening engagement, retention, quality, and patient experience. So we always say, just kind of look for your nugget, find your nugget throughout today's session. So what is engagement? Engagement is to the extent of which employees are passionate about their work and committed to their organization. So what does engagement exactly look like? It can look like these things: happiness, energy, focused, even if there are distractions, taking action rather than waiting to be asked, that willingness to step outside of your formal roles to help others, and adapting to internal and external changes. Speaking positively about the organization is what engagement can look like. So to break down some business results, results have shown that with higher employee engagement your organization or business has, you could see higher clinical safety scores, quality scores, and stronger financial performances. And I always like to include this illustration here. This illustration shows us how we go from having really strong engagement to having a successful financial performance. If you have successful engagement, then an employee can provide a greater patient experience, and employees seem to remain while resulting in a better financial performance for the organization. So there are many factors that contribute to engagement, such as employees having the resources that they need, finding meaning in their work, is the work that they do worth the effort, and are their efforts aligned with the long-term goals of the organization overall. Satisfaction with salary and benefits doesn't drive engagement itself. Of course, it does impact the ability to hire and retain employees, but it doesn't lead to those business results, those overall results. Many employees are more likely to stay at an organization where they feel heard, valued, and the overall culture is something they couldn't find anywhere else, or they seem to think that they couldn't find that anywhere else. So when it comes to engagement and turnover, Press Ganey and Gallup are the biggest publishers of two of the most used employee engagement assessments in healthcare. Last year, assessments in Gallup, they published a study comparing metrics from healthcare organizations who had the highest 25% of engagement scores with those in the bottom 25%. And here's what they found. Organizations with the highest levels of engagement had 78% lower absenteeism than those in the lowest quartile. There was also 58% fewer safety incidents than those in the lowest, and they also had lower turnover than those in the lowest quarter, with 51% lower turnover when it was compared to organizations with historically low turnover for those with 21% with historically high turnover. I want to bring in Shannon to kind of discuss a little bit about that as well.
Thanks, Alexis. Yeah, so kind of the upshot of this slide is just illustrating, kind of putting some numbers to what Alexis showed before about the impact that engagement has on patient care, on quality, patient satisfaction, and turnover. So when you compare the organizations that had the highest engagement versus the lowest engagement, you can see how it shows up in each of these elements. So let's take a look at kind of what's happening engagement-wise in healthcare overall. So this is looking at Press Ganey data going back several years. Some of you may have use Press Ganey in your organizations. Here's what's been happening with engagement over the last several years. So looking back to 2018, on a 5-point scale, Press Ganey's average over healthcare, and this is not just rural healthcare organizations, but all healthcare. We started at kind of about 4.14, and engagement has kind of slowly ticked down for many years in a row. The good news is that it has microscopically started to tick up in the last year. And the really good news is that includes RNs, which is a really big deal. We know how challenging it's been to recruit, to retain, and to keep the nursing staff engaged with all of the competition from traveling nurse organizations and just the difficulty associated with the job. It's not an easy job. So it's a really big deal that nursing staff engagement is starting to go up a little bit. And a lot of researchers are attributing that to just increased attention that's been paid to nursing staff retention in the last year. Alexis and I work with a lot of hospitals and clinics who are really struggling with nursing staff recruitment, which is absolutely a challenge. It can be very difficult, but our advice for those organizations is the first step is to keep who you have. So to really focus on engagement of your existing staff, because we know people are less likely to leave if they experience all of the elements of engagement that Alexis just talked about. So having meaning in your work, feeling that it's safe and worthwhile to speak up, having the resources that you need to engage, and really understanding where you fit in the big picture of the organization. So going back to the data, physician engagement has stayed fairly steady since 2018, and it kind of follows the same pattern. It kind of the average scores hover just above 4, so between 4.3 and 4.03 and 4.06. A couple of things to note is that the engagement of leaders in healthcare is not quite trending in the same direction as the overall score. So leader engagement has continued to decline over the past couple of years. It's gone down about 4% over the last 3 years. So that's something to really pay attention to if you want to keep your leaders. Maybe some attention paid to them could pay off for everybody. One other thing to note is that millennials have the lowest engagement ratings of all generations. So about 0.2 on the rating scale, lower than average than the overall group. And we're going to talk about differences in life stage versus generations in a little bit here, but that's just something to pay attention to. What's really interesting about that, at the risk of taking us down a rabbit hole on this, is that it's really common for people, regardless of generation, to have the lowest engagement when they're about 4, 5 years to 9 years in a role, which would not be completely unexpected for millennials to kind of fall into that. So we don't know if that's a generational thing necessarily, or just related to the amount of time that people have in their role that their engagement tends to go down, but just something to be aware of. So adding in Delta program data over the past couple of years, the engagement assessment that's given to Delta hospitals and clinics through the center has different questions than Press Ganey. So we can't conclude from this graph that Delta healthcare organizations have lower engagement than the national average, but still we can kind of compare trends and see where things have been going over the last couple of years. So you can see that in 2021 and 2023, we don't have any data. We didn't feel like we had enough data to really make meaningful comparisons. So we've really got 3 years of data. We're looking at 2020 versus 2022 versus 2024. But overall, things seem to be generally going in similar directions. So there was a pretty significant dip between 2020 and 2022, and then we've ticked up again a pretty decent amount in 2024. We're not far into 2025 yet, enough to see where things are going, either in the Delta program or kind of overall in healthcare, but there are some hints that things could get a little bit more challenging in this next year. We've got uncertainty about the economy, uncertainty about federal support for healthcare and just rural health support in general. There are a lot of things outside our control, but the good news is there are a lot of things that we can do. There are some things in everybody's control to support engagement and retention just by the interactions that leaders have with employees every day. So that's what we're here to talk about. So here's what we know about organizations with the most effective leaders, and this is across the board. This is certainly applicable to healthcare, but it's not just in healthcare, it's everywhere. So when an organization has particularly effective leaders, they are 13 times more likely to outperform peer organizations. They have 3 times higher engagement than peer organizations, and they have higher rates of retention than peer organizations. And since we heard from Alexis, that organizations with higher engagement have far less turnover, that kind of makes sense. Engagement leads to retention. And the big question is, what do we mean by the most effective leaders? Sorry, I'm having clicking problems today. This quote is from Daniel Goleman, who was the originator of the concept in the field of study of emotional intelligence. And here's what he says. He says, the best leaders don't just know one style of leadership. They're skilled at several different styles. And if you have been exposed to situational leadership or something related to that, that's kind of what that encompasses, is that there are different circumstances where a different approach is most effective. And this is along the lines of that, but connected to flexing not only to the situation, but to the people that you're dealing with. And so the most effective leaders, according to Daniel Goleman's research, have the flexibility to switch between styles as the circumstances dictate. And by circumstances, he's referring to the people that we're engaging with. Emotionally intelligent leaders are aware and intentional and adaptable in their interactions with people. That's really what emotional intelligence is all about. And Goleman's framework breaks EQ, or that's one of the couple of abbreviations of emotional intelligence is EQ rather than IQ, into these 4 domains. And all of these are really important for effective leadership. So if we walk through each of these, it looks like this. So self-awareness is kind of, as the name implies, about being aware of what's happening with ourselves as leaders. So knowing what we're feeling and why we're feeling that way. Leaders who are self-aware can recognize when they're feeling emotions that have the potential to maybe impact their behavior in ways that maybe go against their goals. So we've all, come to work having maybe a rough morning at home, and you kind of know, okay, I'm feeling a little bit stressed out because of what happened before I got here. Let me kind of get myself together so that I can approach the day in the way that I want to show up for people. So that's the self-awareness piece. The people with higher levels of self-awareness also tend to be clear about their values, their preferences, and their tendencies, and how they do show up for others. Then self-management takes that awareness a step further. So self-awareness is about what we know. So that self-management piece is about what we do with that. So it's about the ability to be really intentional with our behaviors, how we interact with people and lead other people when things are going well and when they're not going so well. So that's the self side of the equation. And then the right side of this, we're looking at the other side. So social awareness is what helps us read other people. So can tell whether a team or an individual is feeling good, they're energized, or they're feeling overwhelmed, or they're feeling frustrated. Maybe when somebody's quiet because they're thinking, or maybe you can tell somebody's quiet because you know enough about them that they seem like they're sort of shutting down and disengaging from the conversation. That's all about social awareness. It's all about having empathy and curiosity about others to really understand kind of what other people are experiencing. Social awareness or relationship management is the what we do with that. So what do we do with our social awareness? It involves behaving in ways that impact other people's experiences, and things like delivering feedback in ways that maybe minimize defensiveness or really have some impact on the other person. Maybe influencing a group, coaching somebody to help them grow and develop. Those are the kinds of things that when we've got high relationship management skills, we're able to do some things with our social awareness to really connect with the other person and meet them where they are. The good news is that emotional intelligence is learnable, and I'm sure everybody in this meeting has learned things, whether it was the hard way or the easy way throughout life, that we've all kind of developed this as we mature and understand what really works, what's important to us, and how we can interact with ways that build relationships and build trust. I saw a question in the chat. Any recommendations for being emotionally intelligent when leading virtually? Ooh, that's a good one. You don't really know what others are going through if you don't physically see them. That's an excellent question. And what I know about virtual leadership, and I've done a lot of reading and learning about leading in a virtual setting. I'll have a book recommendation that I can't think of at this moment, but it's a really good one. But what we know about building relationships in a virtual environment is the importance of being extra intentional about it. So where, when we're in person, you will run into somebody in the hall, or you really think, oh, I need to go find so-and-so today so that I can talk to them about something. That doesn't happen as easily in a virtual environment. And so to meet more often and to use as many senses as you possibly can with people. So rather than maybe just having a phone call, can you have a video call like this where you can see people's face, and do it more often, and make sure that you make time in those kinds of meetings to connect on a personal level and not just kind of, run through a couple of to-do items on the to-do list. But I will, if I can't remember the name of the book by the end of this, I will, maybe Caleb, can I share that with you to share out with everybody when you send materials?
Well, of course you can. I'd love for them to have that information. Just send it my way.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to make a note of that. Okay. And if you've got specific questions, more specifics, I'm happy to answer those. Love it. Keep those coming. Let me get myself organized again. When I click on something, that throws me off. Here we go. Oh. So Alexis talked about the key drivers of engagement, and emotionally intelligent leaders work to adapt the ways they approach each of these 4 drivers in ways that align with the unique characteristics of each individual. So a little bit of a disclaimer. For the rest of our time together today, we're going to look at some of the characteristics that show up in the workplace and that are important to consider when it comes to adapt, like an adaptable approach. As we talk about the ways that we can adapt, I encourage you to think about what you personally already do to adapt. This is something that we all do all day. We're just kind of adding to the pool of information and maybe giving some specific, explicit things to be thinking about when it comes to being an adaptable leader and just upping your game just that much more. So to maybe consider some things you maybe haven't thought about. And I also encourage you to think about ways that you can develop your current and future leaders to be more adaptable and build their own emotional intelligence by practicing some of the things that we talk about today. So today we're going to speak kind of generally, as Alexis said, kind of thinking about these two webinars together. Today is the more general part of the conversation. We're going to throw a bunch of individual differences on the table. It's just some ways to think about differences between people. You'll probably recognize all of these characteristics, and you'll probably be able to think about examples of people you know who have these different characteristics and how you've interacted with them. And on Thursday, we'll get really tactical. So we'll start to dig into how we might tailor the ways that we interact with people, so that it really hits home for a specific person while you're having a one-on-one meeting, while you're having a coaching or conversation, while you're giving feedback. So today is sort of the kind of laying the groundwork for the conversation that we'll have on Thursday. Just a couple of examples of how this shows up. So if you take motivation to engage in the upper right of this graphic, it's about finding meaning in our work. And as we know, different people find different things meaningful. So some people might get their meaning from helping other people, but others might find meaning in creating order and standardized practices. And there are different ways of having meaningful conversations with people who get their sense of meaning at work from each one of those pieces. And there may be different ways of organizing work so that each person can tap into what's important to them. Freedom to engage down in the lower left is about feeling like our input matters and that it's safe to speak up. So you've probably worked with, I have no doubt that you've worked with some people who are very comfortable speaking up, and maybe others who need a little bit more encouragement and support. And it takes different approaches by a leader to foster freedom to engage in those two different types of people. Just a couple of examples of how this kind of slowly is going to start to come together. So let's look at the kind of the broad landscape of differences that leaders encounter every day. Well, that all of us encounter every day. These differences are really good opportunities to practice emotional intelligence by being intentional about our behavior and adapting accordingly. There are an infinite number of ways that people are unique from each other, but we're going to focus on 3 areas that are particularly relevant in the workplace. And where leaders often find themselves needing to adapt, especially if it's a characteristic of somebody that's very different from how we as an individual operate. So really starting to get into the nitty-gritty of how somebody else thinks that might be different than us and how we can change the way that we interact with them. In all of these situations, I'm going to say one more disclaimer, we're speaking in very broad generalities. We're talking about just common themes of people who, and kind of putting people in these artificial categories, which may or may not apply to an individual person. So, and we'll probably repeat this multiple times today and on Thursday. Ultimately, the most important driver of engagement is when leaders really know their employees and what's important to them, and then adapting their approach, regardless of whether they fit into the mold of a certain category or not. So first, we'll talk about personality and dispositional traits. Personality is more about kind of consistent patterns of thinking and feeling and behaving. Disposition is just sort of tendencies towards certain behaviors or responses. The traits that we're talking about are traits that are stable over time and shape how people communicate and how they make decisions and how they respond to stress and new situations. So as a leader, adapting to these personality traits might mean changing how you give feedback, how you structure a project, how you run a meeting, those kinds of things. Then we'll get into experience level. A person's years in their role or in their field influence what they need from you. And we've all probably experienced this in our own careers. You're new to a field and you need a little bit more structure, a little bit more support from your team, the people around you, to build your confidence and build your skills. While when you've been in a role for a longer period of time, you might want some more autonomy and decision-making ability and giving some input into some higher level decisions that get made because you've got that experience behind you. And lastly, we'll dive into life stage and generation. So a lot of times we lump these two things together and label them generational differences. And what we know is that what we often call generational differences is just a reflection of where people are in their life. So regardless of whether you were born in the 50s or the 90s, when you're 25, this tends to be what's important to you. So we'll get into that. So life stage is about where somebody is in their personal and professional journey. So maybe you're just out of school, maybe you're raising kids, maybe you're getting close to retirement. That's what we mean by life stage. Generation is kind of as we normally think about it. So are you a Gen Xer? Are you a millennial? Are you a Gen Z? Are you a boomer? When were you born and how does that shape who you are? Again, the bottom line is just that leadership is not one size fits all. The more that we can pay attention to these differences, the more effective and adaptable our leadership becomes. Sorry for the double clicks. Let's look at a couple of examples of personality and dispositional traits and how they relate to the workplace. So the traits that are shown here on this slide are part of the 5-factor model of personality, or you might have heard of the big 5 personality traits, developed in the 1990s by Paul Costa and Robert McCrae. There's been a lot of research done into these since the 90s. And the general finding is that these traits aren't necessarily culture specific. We see them across cultures globally, and also that they're quite stable over the course of a person's lifetime. Once we hit kind of our mid-teens, these personality traits tend to stay pretty stable over the course of our life, with the exception of, a major crisis can kind of throw things into make some differences. So we all know about extroverts and introverts. Extroverts tend to process information out loud. They get their energy from interacting with other people. Introverts tend to process information by reflecting. Again, we're speaking in broad generalizations. And introverts tend to prefer one-on-one or small group interactions over a large group. Agreeableness is about being focused on people and helping other people, and people who are high on agreeableness tend to be really also high on social awareness when it comes to emotional intelligence. Conscientiousness, people who are high on conscientiousness tend to be focused on organization and creating standard operating practices and adhering to policy. People who are high on conscientiousness really like to kind of put those systems in place. And then there's openness to experience, which is my personal favorite. I think it's really interesting that we know that some of us are more receptive to new ideas and new experiences than others. This can also be connected with risk sensitivity. So people who are lower on openness to experience, who don't immediately tend to jump on board with new ideas, tend to recognize risks more than those who are high on openness to experience. And they might recognize things that other people might miss, and maybe a little bit less comfortable with change. So we've got these personality traits that show up in the workplace on a regular basis. And if you're familiar with this model, you might notice that there is a trait called neuroticism that is missing from this list. The dimension is also called emotional stability, which is a lot nicer than the original term of neuroticism. But we left it off this list because it's a little bit more controversial. There's a little bit less research support for it. And it also has a really negative connotation. So kind of for the purposes of today's conversation, we're going to focus on the other side of things when we left that one off. So how does this show up when it comes to adapting? Why are we even talking about this? When we put together the drivers of engagement and personality and dispositional characteristics, just share a couple of examples of ways leaders might need to adapt their approach. Looking at capacity to engage, just one example. If you've got an employee with a lot of conscientiousness who prefers a well laid out plan so that we know what's going to happen and when, and they have a hard time doing their work when there's a lot of uncertainty, it could be a barrier for them doing their best work if a plan is not in place, or if things are really vague and uncertain. In cases like this, it might take a more energy on the part of the leader to help them lay out a plan, whether one has already been established or if you can just sit down together and lay one out. What do we know? What kinds of things do we know are coming that we can kind of lay out into a plan to encompass the things that they have control over and that give them kind of the mental space to do their best work. Just one example. If we look at motivation to engage, which is about finding meaning in work, people who are high on agreeableness or concern for people generally tend to find a lot of meaning in helping people. And so if somebody who's high on agreeableness is in a job where they're not able to interact with people to the extent that they want to, it might be really hard for them to feel engaged in their work. And if you think about what's happened with electronic health records over the last several years, there are a lot of providers who got into healthcare because they wanted to help people and are finding themselves spending a lot of time interfacing with the computer screen and lots of clicks and data entry, which can be a barrier for them doing their best work and can lead to disengagement on their part because they're not able to tap into how they find meaning at work. When it comes to freedom to engage, it's about feeling safe to speak up. So if your plan is to make a decision during a group meeting, just let's all come in and make a decision, that might work great for extroverts who like to think out loud and think on the spot. But an introvert might have a hard time getting a word in or might prefer more time to reflect before being ready to make a decision. And so thinking about how you can meet the needs of people on both ends of the spectrum, if you really want to get people's input into a decision, can be a priority for leaders who want to keep that sense of freedom to engage. And an example of strategic engagement, employees who have a lot of openness to experience, who tend toward curiosity and enjoying new things, might be really inspired by your stories of a vision of the future, because that just kind of that gets them excited and motivated, while people who don't have that same immediate enthusiasm about new things might just need more information. So those are two really different ways to manage that when there's a change at process. So that was just a dip into some personality differences. Let's take a look at experience level. So when we talk about experience level, we're talking not just about experience in the field, but in a role. So if somebody is in a technical role and has been in there for a long time and then gets promoted to a leadership role, they've now gone right back up to the top of this list, and now they're early in their role again. And as with everything, we're speaking in generalizations again, and there are absolutely differences between people, but this is just what we know the tendency tends to be. So when someone is early in their role, the priorities for them to have them feel they have the resources and all the different components of engagement, some structured guidance from their leader, more frequent feedback, and the opportunity to build their confidence kind of slowly. So not throwing them in the deep end and whenever possible, but to help them kind of build things slowly. When people have been more settled in their role for approximately 2 to 4 years, that their fundamental skills are in place and they're ready to take on, generally speaking, ready to take on some increased responsibility, increased decision-making ability, to master their skills, to kind of become masters at they're in their field, and improving efficiency, helping to make some decisions about ways to make things better in the department. And some acknowledgement of their growing contribution, to recognize that they contribute on a deeper level, maybe than people who are newer in their role, and to recognize that. When people get more experience, so again, varies very much person to person, but we're talking about over 4 years. The priorities to keep this group engaged tend to be strategic or broadened involvement. So getting exposed to some of the more strategic decisions that are being made in the organization, and or exposed to more parts of the organization, just to broaden their view of what happens there. To share their knowledge and to mentor other people. So that's a nice kind of mirror of people early in their role, tend to need confidence and building their skills, and people who are experienced tend to really prioritize helping that happen. And innovation, solving complex problems. They've got all this knowledge and experience behind them, and so to help them put it to use. And as I mentioned earlier, people with 4 to 9 years of experience tend to have the lowest levels of engagement. And one hypothesis for a reason for this is because we're not as good at doing this with experienced people to help them really continue, even if they aren't moving to another role, to continue to grow their understanding of what happens in the organization and grow their influence inside and outside the team. So a couple of examples of ways that we as leaders can adapt to experience level. For people who are new in their role, provide clear instruction, frequent check-ins, offering mentorship, maybe with a more experienced employee. It doesn't always have to be the formal leader themselves. And some structured learning paths. So not just teaching, but here's what it's going to look like. Here's what your next 2 years are going to look like, and how we have a plan for helping you learn and develop in your role. And to celebrate small wins. For those who are kind of in that middle category, who have been settled in, to work on delegating, which Alexis and I hear often is a real challenge for leaders. Delegation is very tough. It's hard to let go of things, and it's hard to put things on the plate of people who are already really busy. So we know that's a reality. But being really strategic and intentional about delegating tasks, thinking about them as a development opportunity with some really clear goals and some coaching along the way. To provide some opportunities for learning from their peers, teaching with their peers and advancing their skills, and to recognize the accomplishments and the growth and the contributions that they've made. And then with more experienced people, to get them involved in those things that are important to them. So involve them in some higher level decision-making, some strategic discussions, encouraging leadership development if that's something they're interested in, to develop, which can be a very different set of skills if they're in a more technical role. So to encourage building those skills and providing them some mentoring opportunities, along with some projects that kind of give them a worthy challenge for the skill and experience level that they bring to the table. And our last big category of differences, as I said earlier, is life stage and generation. So these aren't entirely separated from experience level. Obviously, the longer we are on this earth and in a role, the longer that our experience level gets. But what we're talking about right now looks broadly at age and stage of life rather than a role specific view. So again, generally speaking, when we're early in our career, we're looking for learning, for visibility. So other people to get to know other people in the organization, build relationships, and build visibility with people who have the ability to make decisions about our careers. Which connects to career mobility, tends to be a big focus for people early in life, and mentorship, being mentored. Again, we're going to see that mirroring between younger employees tend to be looking for mentorship. Older employees tend to be looking to give mentorship. So it can be a great opportunity. In mid-career, the priority tends to be work-life balance, growth in career growth, and leadership opportunities. And then later in career, we get into, it's less about moving up the ladder and more just about kind of leaving a legacy. So giving meaningful contributions, stability in work, legacy, as I said, and mentoring others. Alexis and I hear often from healthcare organizations who are really struggling with juggling multiple generations in the workplace. And while differences across generations, Gen Z versus Gen X, absolutely exist, the research is overwhelmingly indicating that the differences that we see are more a function of life stage than generation. If you've ever heard a podcast or read an article or a book by Jean Twenge, she is one of the most well-known researchers in the field of generational differences right now. And her book, I think, is at the bottom of this slide. But if you just Google her, she's in the last couple of years, she published kind of this seminal work on generational differences in 2023, and she's been everywhere. So she's on podcasts, interviews, lots of articles. Her work gives us a lot of insight, especially about younger generations. So the way that she approaches her research is using cross-temporal, so looking across decades of time and doing meta-analysis. So it's not just one study, it's kind of taking all of the studies that have been done over the course of time and drawing some conclusions about them. So, and her research compares people at the same age across different decades. So if you were 25 in 1975 versus if you were 25 in 1995 versus 2025, what are the similarities and what are the differences? And what it does is it helps us separate what's a generational trend, millennials versus boomers, from what's just being 25. So let's take a quick quiz. I'll just let you think about this. We won't ask you to input anything, but think for a minute. Which of these things do you think about are more about where we are in our life, or which generation we're a part of? Millennials, boomers, etc. So work centrality, which is about how important is work to you in your life. I think that's life stage or generation. The answer is life stage. So we tend to, when we're in our 30s to 50s, be more focused on work than when we're younger than that or older than that. That's not necessarily generational. Organizational loyalty, again, more about life stage. Same time frame if we're in our 30s to 50s, regardless of when we reach that age, we tend to have the most organizational loyalty. What about anxiety? I think it's life stage or generation. That one is actually generational. So we do know that younger generations, so the Gen Alphas, the Gen Zs, and the younger millennials tend to be more anxious than those who are older millennials, Gen X, and baby boomers and silent generation. Comfort with risk tends to come with life stage. So younger people, regardless of generation, tend to be more comfortable with risk, while as we get older, we tend to look more for stability in our careers. Younger people the younger generations currently do tend to value leisure time more than older generations. So the stereotype of the younger generations wanting more time off is actually supported by research. And desire for quick advancement is a little bit of both. So Gen Alphas and Zs tend to expect and be wanting quicker advancement than older generations, but it also tends to be a function of younger versus older folks. So that's also has always been the case with younger people, that when we're earlier in our career, we're ready to kind of look for ways to move up the ladder. And we know like I said, there's a million different ways we can think about differences between people. We can think about cultural backgrounds. We can think about past experiences. We all bring our past experiences with us into the workplace, and that contributes to our differences. We all have different energy patterns, work rhythms. Are we more productive in the morning versus the afternoon? There's many different ways to categorize characteristics of people as there are people in the world. And as Alexis said, if you're thinking, we can't possibly make all of these calculations in our head every time we interact with somebody, what are we supposed to do with this? We are totally with you. We can't possibly keep all of this front of mind, and that is not the intention. The main point of all of this is that it's really important for leaders to know the people who work for them. So that requires spending time with them. And if it's virtual, that's even more important. and finding out what's important to each individual person and what helps them do their best work. It doesn't mean you need to change plans completely to accommodate each individual on your team, but just thinking about how can I interact with each of you, and how can I set things up like decision making and planning in ways that help each of the people on your team do the best work and make their best contributions to those decisions and those plans. And you can do this by asking questions like, how do you like to receive feedback? How can I best support you right now? Which is a great conversation to have during one-on-one meetings, which we'll talk about on Thursday. But people will usually tell you what they need if you're willing to listen and take in their input. And over time, from asking questions, you start to notice patterns. Oh, this person likes to brainstorm out loud before making a plan. This person tends to do best when they have time to kind of organize their thoughts before we come to make a decision. And these kind of become your internal shortcuts rather than doing all the calculus in your head. Okay, this person is 25 and they're an extrovert. That's impossible. But these kind of become, you get built some muscle memory, and these become kind of your internal shortcuts without having to do all of the calculations every time you interact with someone on your team. Because here's the upshot. Going back to our definition of engagement, which is when people are passionate about their work and committed to the organization, it boils down to what's on this slide. That we know being adaptable leader is what makes one of the biggest things that make for an effective leader. And it's about understanding what each person needs to thrive and meeting them where they are when it matters the most. That's really the crux of the whole story. So I'm going to pass things back over to Alexis to wrap us up.
Thank you. So, everyone, next time we're kind of going to do a deeper dive into discussing different or specific practices that can foster engagement, such as having those one-on-one meetings. And like Shannon was saying, when you do have a virtual, you meet a lot of your staff virtually, how important that is. Having those conversations where a leader can offer feedback and having those impactful coaching opportunities with your staff. Let's see, did it advance? Okay, so again, we know that all of the methods won't work for each individual, but we also know having the basic tools to work with can really provide the foundation to change course of any situation that isn't looking always positive. And so we kind of want that to be the takeaway. It's just that sometimes just having those tools in your toolkit to utilize for different situations, you do have access to those. So now we'll open it up for questions or comments via chat or the opportunity to unmute your line. We're happy to answer any questions regarding the content that was shared today. Any questions?
Hi, this is Chrissy Smith. I hope you guys can hear me. I'm actually at a conference.
Yes.
I am a fairly new leader, and there were times where I thought I was emotionally intelligent. I thought I was engaging. I thought I was all of these things to foster great work, uh, adaptability by the employees that work under my leadership. And I'm finding that I'm not all of the things that I thought I was. So what do you guys share with new leaders on how to, create, uh, how do you, I guess, how do you build that good leader, per se, so that you can make sure that they're leading their employees or the people that they're working with in towards the goals of the organization or the company that you're working for?
Alexis, you want to take that one, or would you like me to?
I can jump in here and then I'll pass it to you, Shannon. I would say, Chris, it's just being able to participate in conversations like this. is definitely a great start. And building off of and building off of that, because of course we know we won't get it right every time. We won't be able to do that. We're human. But being able to have different resources at your disposal to be able to use. So knowing that, hey, I may have to approach this conversation one way, but also, like I said, starting with conversations and attending like these type of sessions and things like that is definitely a great start. And I'll pass it to Shannon.
I back that 100% concur. Yeah. So, what we know about good leadership is there is no formula. It'd be nice if there was, but there's no step 1, step 2, step 3, voila, success, because we're dealing with people and people are unpredictable. So as a new leader, which by the way is so hard, so kudos to you for taking it on and working to be your best self when it comes to leadership. Is number 1, ask your employees for feedback. If you have a meeting, at the end of the meeting, say, how did this go? What if there's something specific that you're working on? I'm working on making sure that I'm listening to what you have to say before I respond, or I'm working to make sure that I'm sharing information in ways you can understand. Whatever it was, ask for feedback, and that is a great way to kind of learn how you're being received by other people. The biggest bang for your buck is to partner up with one or more seasoned leaders who you can run ideas by. So if you've got a challenging conversation coming up, and these can be people inside or outside of the workplace. So if you've got a challenging conversation coming up, or some feedback that you need to give, or just someone that you're really having a hard time connecting with, have a little support group around you that you can run things by and get other people's input. And even better than a seasoned employee is somebody who operates maybe really differently than you do. So if you're really analytical and they're really gregarious and outgoing, or vice versa, find somebody who thinks differently than you do, because it can help to get a different perspective. Those are the two, but the fact that you're even asking this question is a really good predictor that you are probably already doing a way better job than you think you are, and the fact that you're wanting to learn is going to mean you're going to be extra successful in the future. But maybe we might be able to share a couple of extra resources that might give you some extra tips, Christine.
If there are any questions that come up after we end the call today, please do not hesitate to reach out. As you can see, the contact information is up on the screen. So if you don't think of anything right now, just let us know if you do. If there are no other questions, then we will speak to you again on Thursday. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And if you are wondering about any of the surveys or credits or where these will be again, I will send all of that information out in an email following the completion of the webinar on Thursday. So again, thank you so much for participating today. Thank you, Alexis and Shannon, for speaking. Wonderful content as always, and I look forward to seeing everyone again on Thursday.